Hello everybody, and welcome to another hair-raising, exciting episode of Radiorama, where I show you how to work on radios and electronics from the 1920s through about the 1960s. And I realized I keep on putting off all the radios that are crammed in the closet here. And I've gotten to the point, actually, I've literally forgotten some of what's in here. I think because a lot of it is just models that I've restored 50 billion times. And I don't feel like restoring again. I can't even tell what's in here. What's this guy? Oh, it's ugly. I'll think about it. This is what I usually do every time I come in here and like, do I want to restore any of these? Like, nah. And I shut the door and work on something totally different. I really need to bring these back, shove them in the storage container to encourage other members who might want to pitch in some electronics restoration time to work on these. That stupid TV, I've been trying to buy a horizontal output tube for it for years, and I just keep putting it off. Oh well. In the end, I decided to work on this one. I think because I'm drawn to pokey, stupid sounding name. And this is an RCA Victor Yachtsman. Now, I recently worked, maybe a few months ago, on another version of this same radio. It's called the Globetrotter, which is an equally cheesy name. And this one's kind of interesting because it has not only AM, but it also has marine. And that's something I don't really see hardly ever, especially on just a consumer grade set. Now let's go ahead and open the back and see what we got going on here for tubes. Well, of course, probably there's a solid state rectifier. It's probably a selenium rectifier inside. But we have a total of 5 tubes, which means like if you were to count the rectifier, it's the equivalent of a 6-tube set. So it's probably pretty sensitive, which it should be. It's a portable. We have a 3V4 for the output, and the AF, well, audio frequency amp is a 1U5. Second detector is a, maybe I'm reading this wrong, whatever. I see this here. I'm really glad this is still in the set. It's a 1L6. And hardly anyone used them. Zenith, and occasionally I've seen them in some other brand, but mostly Zenith, for whatever reason. And they're getting to be pretty rare. And so if that's bad, that's probably $70 right there if you were to buy it retail. There's even people making solid state replacements for it because it's so ridiculous, especially if you collect Zenith Transoceanics. The miniature era of those has 1L6 in it. But anyway, I'm going to have to make a guilty admission, which is I already kind of tested it out to see what it would do, just because I was like, if that 1L6 is bad, then I don't want to restore this. So I did plug it in, which is a great big no-no. You should not do that. So like I said, my warnings in the beginning of my videos. Anyway, I hear static. It's not picking up anything. I think it's because the contacts in some of these miniatures, especially in portables, if you don't have perfect contact, you will lose connections in the pins. I'm not sure what its service history is. We've got someone that's written tube types on there. I guess that makes sense to make it easier to restore. The cord looks like it's original. It's in pretty good shape, actually. I remember why I liked this model. There's actually a lot of room in the chassis, because a lot of these portable guys are just a pain as far as room goes. And it doesn't have any crazy values as far as electrolytic, because some of these portables have like a 200 microfarad 20 volt third capacitor as a bias. And so I got to dig through all my weird high capacitance capacitors, or high microfarad capacitors. And, well, I'll shut up and we will take the chassis out and just take a look around, see what's going on in there. Alright, so I got the chassis out, and the very first thing that I noticed, which just shows kind of what a radio nerd I am, look at that. I haven't seen that big of a tuning condenser ever in a portable. I mean, granted, we've got a whole extra band here, which is in itself pretty unusual. But, god dang, this thing is probably sensitive as hell. Anyway, I took a look underneath here, and it looks like we're 100% completely bone stock original, which is what I love to see. That means I know that someone has not come in here and jerry-rigged crap and, made things worse. Looks like we have a gigantic dropping resistor coming off of the ground here. And that goes to one end of the... I can't tell if that's the switch or not. I think it is. And we have 4 different electrolytic values here. We can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4 lugs sticking out of the bottom. And even though it's kind of hard to see, you see that looks like a half moon shape behind that lug? Well, each one of these has a stamped out shape in the bottom of this electrolytic capacitor. So, what you do is you flip it upwards. And we got a 50, a 40, a 160, and 40. So there's a crazy electrolytic in there. But anyway, we got the half moon, square, and triangle, and the unmarked one is probably the crazy value. No, it's not. It is the triangle is the 160. The rest of these I'll just replace with good old-fashioned 47 microfarad 160 volt caps. We do indeed have the selenium rectifier. I have a tendency to replace those because even though it takes a long time to beat them up, and they're especially not used in portables that much because batteries were, naturally more expensive than running it on AC. Well, the other thing I need to look for is the grounding cap, which is here. It's coming off of the common shared negative of the electrolytic capacitor, and that goes to chassis ground. That is probably the wrong value. Plus, it's the wrong type of capacitor. But we'll get into that later. Don't worry about that. We have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 paper capacitors and 4 electrolytics. So there's a lot to replace in here. These are good radios if you're just like, I'm bored to hell and I want to spend like the next 3 or 4 hours of my life replacing capacitors. Well, this is the radio for you. And sometimes that's called for. It's very rewarding just to sit there and mindlessly replace capacitors. Welcome to day 2 of working on the RCA Yachtsman. I didn't actually get that much done last night. I was about to proceed, and then the mailman shows up, and he has a little cardboard box, and I didn't think anything of it. And because we get a lot of packages, and so I opened it up, and it turned out to be the ashes of my deceased cat, and so that kind of threw me off, and I don't know. That put me kind of in a sad mood. And just a word out there for any of you that own pets, or even if you don't, if you lose a pet and you feel grief, it's okay. I think it kind of caught me off guard how much this really has affected me. But, life goes on, and so I guess everyone will go through that process with either somebody or an animal at some point in their lives, and that's just... Anyway, I'll quit rambling about that. So what I have here is all the electrolytics that I need. We have 4 electrolytics. I know from experience this model has a ton of 0.05 microfarad caps. I just got a bunch of those out so I don't have to continue standing up and down to get stuff out of my parts bin there. So I'll start with the electrolytic capacitors first. There's 4 lugs here. This is the one that has the weird funky value. I think it's like 150 or 200 microfarads. It's low voltage. It's just a bias. It's not super duper duper critical as far as the capacitance rating. So I found this, which is 300 microfarads, which is overkill. Doesn't matter. It'll work. The rest of these, especially if you have a tube coming off the rectifier, if you put a grossly huger electrolytic value in there, you could punish the rectifier a little bit more than it should. In this case, it's probably not a big deal because we have a solid state one that's going to be replaced with a diode that can take all kinds of punishment. But it can also be out in your output tubes. I'm not sure how much it is on a portable set with low voltage filaments. I'm assuming it's principally the same. So your values, I haven't talked about this in a while if you're new to radios and electronics in general. Your values are written on the can as we saw earlier. Now what you want to do is replace it with a value that is at or greater of the original. You can go a little bit below or a little bit above, it's fine. So there's a bunch of 40 microfarad caps in there. So I have a bunch of 47 and they're all rated at 150 volts. These are rated at 160 volts. Gives me just a little bit more of a cushion. These are all, I just generically order 630 volt line caps. And the most important cap that we will replace is going to be that one. And that will be replaced with one of these guys. It's an X2 or Y2 cross the line rated cap, rated at 0.01 microfarads, which is such a lower value that the potential of the amount of current potential going to the chassis will be lowered to such a degree where the worst you might get is a little bit of a tingle, maybe a little uncomfortable situation, but not like a big full-on zap. And by the way, I'm not saying you should test this theory by going out and touching your radios when they're on. I don't recommend that, but just in case something happens, that's one of the biggest safety changes you can make to any of these floating ground sets. Now, I say floating because there's no absolute direct connection of the line to chassis. There's just that cap. Some of the other sets are not so lucky. Some of them are actually have one end of this going to chassis, and that's a real shock hazard. So usually when I get one of those, if I can't make it physically isolated from the user, then I won't do it. You know, if it's a museum piece, sure, they're not going to be powered up. If it's mine, I know I'm never going to touch the radio. But if it's going to go to someone I don't know in the future, not a chance. It's too great of a safety risk. All right, so we got the electrolytics replaced and some of the other caps that I had to kind of get out of the way so it would make it easier to install them. Sometimes you just got to be real creative when you're in a set that's got a lot of stuff in it. This one's a little tighter than the last one I worked on because it didn't have the extra band. But what I do is I get my negative leads as close as I can to the negative, well, mounting lugs from the original electrolytic, and then I yank all the old lugs out to make even more room, and so that means everything fits pretty nicely. At this point I want to do some tests to see if the set actually now works, and I think in order to do that I'm going to clean the band switches and the tube sockets. So I'll pull each tube out, maybe scrape its pins, put a little cleaner in there, put them back in, wiggle them around, and then we'll reattach the antenna and see if we get any life out of it. All right, it's time to do the deed. I'm going to give it a test fire here.
Imagine somebody like Thurgood Marshall back in 1967 or more recently, Clarence Thomas, being asked to handle these type of questions as if somehow to suggest.
All right, seems to work pretty well. I don't want to keep it powered up with any more of those old wax caps in there. I'm going to take it out of here. Remove my precious WinL6 and put it back up here for safekeeping. And so we can proceed with the rest of the boring old recapping job. I just usually like to try to test things when I haven't replaced too many things, so that if there is a problem, I will be able to back up a little bit. But in the meantime, what we got here are a whole ton of caps. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Jesus. I remember every time I look at these, I'm trying to remember like what is the pain point, and I think there's so many capacitors in it. But whatever, keeps me out of trouble on a Thursday night. All right, so this is probably going to take another hour, and then we can test it again. And what I do when I replace capacitors is I snip one end, replace one end with the new cap, snip the other end, do the same thing with the other side. That way you don't lose your place. And since I'm doing a little bit of a refreshing on this episode, I'll show how you read these paper cap guys. See that? 0.047 microfarads, 200 volts. 200 volts is like the working voltage, basically. They're squishy caps. I was able to deform that thing with my hand. That doesn't seem right. Oh well. So we'll have to place all these dudes, and then we'll do another test. Probably the performance could be markedly better. Just got to say, I would not recommend this set for a beginner. Like, the cap situation is ridiculous in this thing. Like, for example, there's one cap here, and you have to snake the wire behind the indentation part of the tuning condenser band switch. And none of these were easy to replace. I've still got 2 more to go. And then I think I'm going to move on to the cabinet after that, because, I mean, this is not fun. I can imagine, I was thinking, like, if you were a bad RCA employee, I wonder if management would move you to the shitty line. It was like, well, you had the good, easy job of putting together, you know, just regular old AA5s. We're going to stick you on the stupid portable radio Yachtsman line as punishment. I don't know, maybe they got paid more. Maybe I'm full of crap. Anyway, I'll shut up and I'll replace these last 3 caps. We'll do the test. Then it's time to move on to much funner things like cleaning the cabinet, which requires no like tedious concentration. All right, well, it's do or die time. I've got all those zillions of capacitors replaced, and I'm hoping that I didn't get anything out of place. We'll know right now when I turn it back on.
Hey, it's Nikki Maduro. If you're concerned...
Strictly, and thank you, Senator Black. Time now for traffic and on the day. How long to wait before the
here, we'll recognize, my gosh, there's really nothing that separates, you know, certain things we like to do and not like to do, you know.
Yeah, sadly, sometimes we get so caught.
Now you're opposite.
Manipulate.
Go. Full court pressure.
Starting at Pine Street, that runs up to get
During the hearing.
PA.
And the most...
We're in good shape. I think the pins on some of these tubes are still dirty. Because you notice when I kind of wiggled them, I get incrementally better reception. I've also got the speaker completely facing down, so of course that's messing up the audio quality. But I suspected, I thought this must be a very sensitive set. And we might be missing a tube shield. I'm not sure if these ever came with them. And plus our antenna situation is ridiculous. It's just got wires everywhere. So I've got good feelings about this. I think I'm going to go ahead and move over to the cabinet as a reward to getting that somehow back and working without making a miswire out of those thousands of capacitors. Well, it's hard to tell from the video, but I've decided as grubby as this thing is, I'm going to give it a clean out in the sink, but I can't do it because the speaker's in there. And unfortunately, it's one of these dealios where it's held in with friction clips. These guys here. But I found a way where you can remove them successfully. And what you do is you get a really skinny, flat blade screwdriver. And I'm not sure if I can successfully do this one-handed. But basically, these things have little corners on them. And you just want to lift up on the corners here, and then you can gently pry them out. I can tell those are going to be more difficult, but if you pry up in the little corners that are biting into the plastic just a little bit, then you can pull these off. But we need to get this out of here before we take it over the sink. Alright, so the next stage that I do, I'll turn the light on up here so we can see a little bit better. If it's really grimy like this one was, like, you know, completely stained in tobacco stains and whatever else happened over 60, 70 years, I spray it with watered down simple green solution. And if you've never heard of that, if you're in another country, it's just a degreaser. I just like this brand because it's non-toxic and it actually kind of smells nice. And it just about cleans anything. So Simple Green, if you're listening, you could sponsor my show. But anyway, I'll let this sit here for a little while, clean it off, and then it'll be on to the plastic polishing stage, which is where I'm going to use my favorite product of all time, Novus number 2. And looks like it's a pretty nice evening out there. Be perfect to just sit in the rocking chair and do that. Well, I had something not good happen. I've never seen this before on a regular plastic case. We now have kind of a very white sort of appearance on the top here. The sides are kind of alright. I'm hoping I can buff this out. Worst comes down to worst, I'm going to have to disassemble it and get a machine buffer to cut whatever that white crap is. I don't know what that is. I'm assuming it's just outgassed oils or something. How aggravating. Alright, well this took probably about an hour, but I was able to get most of the gunk, the white stuff, off. The thing is the more I polished, the more it smelled like cigarettes, so I think there was just... It's a little bit of a softer, more like flexible plastic, so it probably has more like plasticizers in it. And so it probably just absorbs more stuff, so it probably absorbed a lot of nicotine. So I'm probably, who knows, getting nicotine in my bloodstream right now. But I've got this actually looking halfway decent. I think I'm going to call it quits for tonight. And tomorrow I'll do a more refined polish on it. And then we'll also add the audio input feature to the chassis. And then we'll do a final reassembly. It should be good to go. Welcome to day number 3 of working on the RCA Yachtsman. And this took quite a bit of effort last night, but I was able to bring the case back around a little bit. I think I have a little bit more work to do on it, but let's put it this way, it's presentable. Now, I'm going to address my attention, or direct my attention back to the chassis. There's one other electrical thing that I need to do here. Well, 2 things. We need to replace that selenium rectifier with a modern diode rectifier, a silicon diode. And the reason is because these have they definitely have a life expectancy where they will eventually fail at some point. Portables, you don't have to worry so much because they weren't used as much, but I'm going to replace it anyway. It's just a good practice to get into. And but we're going to need to do 2 things. We need to both replace that, but also you have to realize that these are not as efficient as the modern diode that we're going to replace it with. And that diode's going to be one of these puppies. I can never remember the numbers. It's like IN something 007. And we need to compensate for that added efficiency by putting in a dropping resistor. And I went to the museum yesterday and got this and this, which is a mounting strip, and we're going to take that out and put this in, and that will be in conjunction with this diode. The schematic basically kind of looks like this. Your positive, you have one end is your incoming positive going to the resistor to the cathode of the diode, and then your negative comes in through the anode. Now, I hope I didn't get that backwards. For some reason, I'm like one of these people that can never remember like right hand, left hand, whatever. I'm dyslexic for some reason in that regard. But if you saw that diagram, it should have made some sense. And so we'll take this out. We'll mount that new configuration in. We'll do a test, and then the next thing I'm going to do is add an audio input feature to this so that the future owner can listen to their music if they choose. They don't want to listen to AM all the time, which I've been explaining to people. There's not much to listen to on AM other than talk and religious shows in this area, and that's probably for most of the continental United States. There has been some talk about bringing AM stereo back, but radio in general is, unless it seems like, most people will religiously listen to NPR going to work, but I don't know a ton of people that listen to radio for the music anymore, which is kind of sad, but such is the state of technology. All right, so we have new rectifier installed, and this thing is so tiny I can't even really film it, but that on the end there, that's the diode, and then the positive end goes to the other side here, So I have a tendency for some reason to dyslexically, that's not even a word, sometimes wire these in backwards, even though I've done it a million times. If you do it, you're going to know right away because you will see smoke. So I'm going to be prepared to turn this off immediately if it does that. I don't hear anything. I don't have an antenna hooked up. I'm still picking things up though. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it run for a few minutes and make sure that we're good as far as heat dispersion, making sure this is not getting too hot. I don't think it will. It's a pretty big resistor anyway, as far as watt dissipation goes. And we've got all this venting around here, these vent holes, so it's far and away from anything that could be damaged by heat, but I just want to make sure that we're on the money here. While I'm doing that, I might take another pass on the case because I'm not super pleased with how that plastic looks. And if this is all good, then it'll be time to add the aforementioned audio input feature. Alright, so now it's time to install the audio input feature. And here are the ingredients that you need. I buy a 6-foot long male-to-male 3.5 millimeter stereo jacks or cables. Then I cut them in half and use 3 feet. More bang for your buck. We need an isolation transformer that goes between us and the incoming audio line. I order these by the bulk from Alibaba. I think they're welding supply transformers, but all it is, it's 120 volts in the primary, 12 volts out secondary. And so what's going to happen is that we're going to run our primary to either end of this volume pot. There's a top and the bottom. There's 3 legs, so it's basically the either opposite ends of the pot. The positive is where the radio signal comes in, which is here. That's going to the first RF stage, and then the bottom of the pot is the other side. That's the ground. And then what we also want to do is this set, most sets of this era, dating back to the 30s and 40s, have an automatic gain control feature. And we discovered that when we put these in, and if you leave them in circuit, they can't interfere with AGC. So to avoid that, we put in a resistor that is half the value of the pot's resistance, the volume pot's resistance, and a 0.02. Doesn't really matter what the capacitance is, anywhere from a 0.01 to 0.05 or more, whatever capacitor, in series with that resistor. And then we tie our right and left channels together for our audio that go into the secondary side of the isolation transformer. We will use super glue to glue it down here, and I roughed it up with a little sandpaper, both that and the isolation transformer. That'll tamp it down real firmly. And then I'll probably need to consider, I was getting ready to say drill some holes in the back. I might not have to. It's got a bunch here for the vents and some here. I think what I did in the last one of these, I just ran it through that hole. You need to tie a knot in it so you don't yank the cable out. And then lastly, we need the ability to switch the RF signal on and off. That's probably going to mean disconnecting this resistor and having a switch wire that restores radio operating ability. And so I know that's a lot to comprehend if you're not totally clear what I'm talking about. I will film what that looks like when we are done, and we'll give it a test out to make sure we can both switch radio on and off. Radio does not interfere with audio input, or audio input does not interfere with vice versa, audio input. It's apparently that time of year again. Every year about this time, there's this pair of ducks that shows up in my garage. And they tend to like to eat cat food, so I guess I better go get them some. Well, ready for the food? Yes? All right. Here we go. Come on. Come on. All right, you have to go outside. I want duck poop. All right. There you go, guys. There you go. Eat up. This is the funniest thing. You ever seen ducks drink? her husband's kind of a dope. Jesus, a loud helicopter. Anyway, I'm really distracted. I need to get back to the radio. Okay, so here's the audio input feature added. I know it's kind of hard to tell because it's so crammed in here. We have a right and left channel resistors going into one side of the secondary side of the isolation transformer, then the associated resistor and the cap going to the top of the volume pot on the other side, which you can't see, going to negative. I'm going to run my audio line probably through one of these holes, loop it around, attach it here, and then I'm going to test it to make sure our audio input actually is coming through. Alright, so we have the audio input running through. Let's give it a test. This is the little Bluetooth module.
You're tuned in to East Tennessee's own listener-supported WDBX. One thing that you have been able to depend on in the last couple of years has
That's not a radio. It is a radio station, but it's coming through a tune-in app. That's my East Tennessee station.
time. You've been able to depend on Grace and Red to get you through the day with the Americana mix.
Anyway, I'm not sure if any of you guys listen to WDVX, but if you do, they're doing their fundraiser. I gave them a little money last night. I've been listening for 25 years, so I figured I owed it to them. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hook up the antenna and make sure that we have properly disconnected the RF signal temporarily, because I don't want radio interference coming in over the audio if I can help it. Okay, we're in great shape now. We have the switching wire coming out. I make them intentionally oversized, overlong. We'll trim that down when we put it back in the case. Last thing I'm going to do is my safety test. I have a reverse polarity box here that then is plugged up to my digital multimeter. I have the meter set at 2 volts AC. Our maximum is 0.6 of a volt on that scale. We're looking for current potential. So I'm going to touch the metal chassis. That's nothing. That's probably the neutral side. Let's do a switch. That's 0.29. Not even halfway there. So this set is very well secured as far as electrical current potential getting to that chassis. Even though it's inside of a case and it's hard to get at, we do have requirements as far as what is the maximum permittable amount of current. And it's quite low, even by today's standards. So I think we're ready to do a final reassembly. I might do some touch-ups on the case, and this thing will be ready to go.
Coming from the land of endless spring, get in touch with God. Get in touch with God. Turn your radio on. Turn your radio on. Turn your radio on. Turn your radio on. And listen to the music in the air. Turn your radio on. Turn your radio on. Heaven's glory share, glory share. Turn your lights down low. Turn your lights down low. And listen to the Master's radio. Get in touch with God. Get in touch with God. Turn your radio on. Turn your radio on.
What an appropriate song. That just came on when I turned it on, and I was like, I got to just enjoy this for a second. Anyway, that's working really well. Likewise, radio is also working great. It's very sensitive. Actually, I think I got it on the wrong band. Let's see. Nope, that was the right band.
Found 101 from DeLong, past Atherton Avenue. Next update.
$19.09.
For genetic databases.
Which leads us to his humility and his change.
Long-term
Talking about less coffee a day during the recent one. Insurance companies.
All right, so I think we're in good shape here. The one thing I will say, I've noticed that early on, RCA would use his master's voice seal. And then they brought it back for just a few years in I think the early to mid 50s, and I'm not really sure what that means. Maybe as an anniversary notification. I don't know. I've also noticed that same logo, I've seen it on some British radios, and it says his master's voice, and it makes me wonder if they're related, because I Of course, there was Victor of Japan, the Victor talking machine company, which was later absorbed by RCA. So I'm not sure what the situation in the UK with that badge is, but I'd be curious if some of you guys know. Anyway, this was kind of a challenging project. Unfortunately, there's nothing on this band, so I basically essentially restored a way more complicated version of the previous Globetrotter that we saw a few episodes back. But it's working good. It looks a lot better. It'll make someone happy. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you see, you can leave those comments down there, and I'll try to get to them. And if you have any questions, you can always ask, and I'll try to see if I can answer them. And in the meantime, y'all have a good evening, or morning, or afternoon, wherever you are. See you next time. Adios.